Hey, thank you, Barrington and the band, and hello, everybody. Welcome to the intergalactic launch of a new book called Ice Walker by James Raffin. I am your host, James Raffin, and pleased to be here to do a reprise of what happened last Tuesday night, October 13th at 7 p.m., which turned out to be a masterclass not only in the wonders of a new book, but also more of a masterclass in the IT incompetence of the host and with some side lessons in the vagaries of rural internet. So yeah. Here we are. For those of you who got missed some of the chopped up bits, particularly the streamed video of some of the guests who were here. I'm recording this all together in one and to put it back out online so that we can get a whole version of this out there. I do appreciate those of you who came along, but you know what? Every hockey game needs a start. Oh, Canada, our home and COVID land. What a crazy time to try to launch a book. My goodness, here we are in these crazy COVID times. Anyway, the idea here is to come together to celebrate the launch of a book that's been 4.5 years in the making. And I want to tell you a little bit about it. I want to introduce you to some of the people who helped make it happen. Right off the top, I would like to thank particularly my spouse and in-house editor, friend, and confidant, Gail Simmons. We've been together a long time, and she's been an incredible supporter of all of JR's activities, and I do want to honor her. I also want to say a special thank you. You'll meet Phyllis Bruce, my longtime publisher and editor, shortly, but I do want to say thank you to Phyllis and the whole team at Simon & Schuster. I also want to say that for those of you who tuned in on Tuesday, and there were over 300 of you, and I'm absolutely delighted with that, but more than half of you actually applied for the prizes that were there, and I just want to, they've come and gone, they've gone all over the place. Canada, the United States, and beyond. Poland. One of the things about having a launch at a big venue in a city is that people are from that area. But when you've got an online launch, people come from all over the place, and so I'm totally glad to say that these prizes have all gone to good homes. But I want to honor the prize givers. Prints, beautiful prints. An 11 by 17 print of a polar bear from my friend and Paul Nicklin, National Geographic photographer, fearless character, an amazing artist, fine artist with his camera. I think that's gone to Thornbury, Ontario. But Mike Bedell, my friend and another fine artist, another fearless guy, had a picture of a mother and two cubs, and she's gone off to two different people along the way. Simon & Schuster graciously came up with 5 copies of the book that have gone hither and yon with inscriptions in them, and through the mail, and on they go. And Students on Ice donated a copy of the C3 book, Canada C3, The Journey from Toronto to Victoria Around the Country. Beautiful coffee table book, edited by James Raffin. It's a wonderful book, and along with some other Students on Ice merchandise, that too has been part of the prize package. We had very coveted polar bear masks, both a beautiful print made by my sister-in-law, Marnie Simmons, down in Linden, Nova Scotia. And if you're interested, that beautiful print, those print masks, and they are a hot item. Marnie's is definitely in the business. I think her business is called Crazy for Color. But email me at that email, james@jamesraffin.ca, and I'd be happy to hook you up with her. There are also a couple of masks with very scary bear mouths on them, and limited edition Ice Walker t-shirts and a mug, of course. But the main prize was very generous, and I do want to especially acknowledge my friends at Adventure Canada, who donated a credit of $1,000 credit on a trip to travel with me and the rest of the gang tomorrow I wish a COVID slip next summer to either into or out of the Northwest Passage. And I also want to honor Adventure Canada, Cedar and Jason and the whole gang there, particularly Victoria Polsoni, who is their social media maven and IT guru, and she's been incredibly helpful, and she put together the actual prize page and helped them a lot with that. So I do want to honor those people who've contributed so generously, and to all of you who applied. Because this is happening after the fact, all I can say is that if you have questions about any of these coveted prize items, just email me and we can let you know. Some of them are limited, and some of them anyway. On we go. Where did Ice Walker come from? Well, I'm a first-generation Canadian. My parents' dad was in the Navy, surgeon lieutenant. My mom was a midwife from the north of Scotland, and they knew they wanted to leave the UK after World War II. And Dad had Navy friends in Australia, South Africa, and Canada, and for some reason they ruled out Australia. And they flipped a coin to decide whether they would go to Canada or South Africa. And it was what it was, heads, and I became a Canadian with my three sisters, and I've spent the rest of my life so far exploring this country of which I'm an accidental citizen. And so Ice Walker is the next in a series. I don't know how many books I've either edited or written, but it's somewhere in the 20s. But I have to say that one of the very influential books in the writing of this book was a return to Fred Bodsworth's amazing story called The Last of the Curlews. And that is a story, it's actually called a novel, but it actually takes you, Fred Bodsworth, it was published, I think, about the same time I was born in the mid-50s. He takes you into the life of a bird called the Eskimo curlew at the time that would darken the skies of mid-North America, the skyways there. There were so many of them, but it was a game bird like a snipe, and it was hunted to extinction. And it's an incredibly sad story, but Fred wanted to bring that situation to the public fore, and in doing so, he didn't want to hector people about what to shoot, what to eat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the facts of the situation. He took people right into the life of the curlew, and it's an incredibly moving story, and that had a big effect on me. Another book that I've come back to is this one, Aldo Leopold's Ocean County Almanac. I mean, there are those kind of books that Thinking Like a Mountain, nobody can listen objectively to the howl of a wolf. I mean, some of the things that have attached, I have been attached to the natural world happily, growing up on a river in southwestern Ontario and having experiences in canoes along the way. But there's also the literature of that world that has enriched this. But I do want to honor Fred Bodsworth and where that whole thing came to be along the way. But Ice Walker has a significant part of its genesis also in something that's happening in our lives that I've been aware of, and you've been aware of too, I'm sure, that a lot of people, a lot of us, are looking north as a result of climate change. And when we do that, the images that come back are quite often of a polar bear in an unpeopled wilderness. And as such, the bear, in many respects, has become the poster child or organism for climate change. And we think about the bear as the bears are often drinking Coca-Cola, and sometimes the representations of bears drive me nuts. Of the idea that the bears are in an unpeopled wilderness. I mean, as I will tell you, I began life as a marine biologist studying polar bear vision, but sort of careened out of that into the lives and the learnings of the people who took me to the bears, the northern indigenous people, the Inuit, and then subsequently around the circumpolar world who know bears really well. But I mean, the way in which bears have insinuated themselves and how advertisers have brought us into, and other storytellers have brought us into the world of the bear, not least St. Alan of Gore in his amazing film, An Inconvenient Truth. And these 28 seconds of video that actually show a polar bear swimming around looking for a place to call home. And at the time, he was roundly damned for that because people said, oh, polar bears don't drown, and that reports of polar bear drownings were very much exaggerated. Polar bears do drown. They're a mammal like us. And if they get exhausted, they drown. And whether they drown in huge numbers is maybe up for debate. But I'm not seeing this as anything other than a metaphor. And that actually took me to a place that helps me understand. I mean, when we think of the North, quite often we think of bears, thanks to TV and media and books and all that sort of, thanks to Al Gore. We think of the North as bears. But the North and bears are, in the Western imagination, are completely connected. So in the northern sky, the one star that doesn't move is Polaris. There's Polaris right there, the North Star. It's right above. I hope you can see my cursor there. It's right above the North Pole, the geographic North Pole. So it doesn't move relative to the Earth. But the constellations that circle around that we probably know the best are the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, the Big Bear, the Little Bear, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. And in fact, the word Arctic comes from the Greek Arctikos, which means home of the bear. So, I mean, we shouldn't be beating ourselves up for thinking of bears in the North in the same sentence. But one of the things I've learned in my travels along the way, and one of the things that's written into Ice Walker, is the idea that how we know bears, we Western people, dwellers of the Middle Earth, know bears, is in fact just one way of knowing bears. And in fact, if you look at the night sky, so there's the Big Dipper in the top left quadrant of this star map. Here's Cassiopeia, the W up here in the sky. Here's Orion rising just there. And but this coming out of work of John MacDonald, who's an amazing anthropologist and northerner, he would be quick to tell you that this constellation, which we know as the bear, we think is the bear in the sky, is actually, in Inuit cosmology, caribou. And the main bear in the Inuit sky is Nanurjuk, who's down here, right there. And she's surrounded by, meaning the bear-spirited one, and she's surrounded by kimit, or dogs, in the sky. And that is just one example of how Northerners know bears and know the world differently than we do. And that's one of the things I have learned in my travels over the last 42 years. And I will say that, this COVID time has been incredible in a lot of ways, but it's the first year in 43 that I haven't spent part of the year north of 60 degrees north. And that's a change. But I want to say that the idea to do a book about polar bears as a follow-up to my last big book with Phyllis Bruce, that idea actually came from thinking about the voices of the many people who welcomed me into their kitchens or onto their snow machines or reindeer sleds or dog sleds or trekals or boats or whatever it was, that who have helped me understand that a number of things about bears that come to be. But I finished this book called Circling the Midnight Sun, coming to the conclusion, thinking of that Al Gore image of the bear swimming around in a warming soup. I think we are the bear in a lot of ways, and that's sort of what Ice Walker is about. It's a portrait of humanity in 24, 28 months in the life of a female polar bear in the Arctic in southwestern Hudson Bay. And it's really meant to be a space to allow the reader, you, to think about what we've done to the earth. And the idea that we are the bear has resonated in my head, but I'm totally delighted that it has resonated in other people's heads as well, including my neighbor and potter in Nova Scotia. My wife Gail is from Nova Scotia, and we spend as much of the year as we can in a tiny cabin on the Gulf Shore. But one of our neighbors and friends at the market there is Jen Hotalling, who's a potter, who in response to a challenge by some of her fellow artists to do a show together, created this piece, which is about 1/2 meter wide by almost a meter and a half the other way, made out of, I think, 182 pieces of ceramic tile or ceramic clay, that glazed clay that she's done. But the title of this piece is "We Are the Bear," and it comes directly from Circling the Midnight Sun. But to give you a bit more of an insight into where the book comes from, I want to say that I'm delighted that my longtime friend and publisher, Phyllis Bruce, and I had a chat, and this was one of the things that our rural internet here choked on Tuesday. So I'm glad it's able to run now in this recording, and the whole thing will be, it's got a different character and color to it. But Phyllis, well, she'll tell you how we met in this conversation we had over Zoom, I think it was, just about a week or so ago. But I should tell you that around here, I mean, I've been with Phyllis, and the relationship with an editor is a very intimate in its own way relationship. Editors get to see the writer's soul and get to carve stuff into it and carve stuff out of it, and it is a seriously enjoyable and productive relationship that does have its challenges, but we have been together for a long time, so much so that my wife, partner, lover, and friend Gail Simmons and I mean, Gail refers to Phyllis as the other woman in the nicest in the nicest possible way. Yeah, Phyllis Bruce, here she is, talking a little bit about Ice Walker and where it came from.
Hi, Jim. Hi.
It's great to see you.
Well, it's wonderful to see you, and our journey in the footsteps of the bear is either about to start or about to finish. I'm not quite sure, but certainly as your publisher, I'm glad to have it finished and have you go out to the world with it.
You know, as I've been thinking about our collaboration, I was remembering I was speaking at a conference at a school in Papineauville, Quebec called Sedberg. And this little guy called Bill Mason sidled up beside me at the lunch table. This would have been in about 1984, and said, Phyllis Bruce is going to be calling you, Susan. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, she asked me if I would do a book about rivers, and I'm too busy, but I thought you might be somebody to do that. And I forget whether I called you or you called me, but that started a collaboration that goes on to this very day.
Bill, of course, is understated as we remember him, but a legend in his own time and still today. And he said, now I realize that, you know, I am the person you want, but there's another person you will want, he said. And he's a young man who's full of ideas, and I think you should be publishing him too. And so I thought, well, I'm sorry, Bill, but you know, I'll talk to this young man. And you were so full of ideas even then. When I look back on our long history together, and I think, what a multiplicity of voices you've created, you know, memoir voice, a history voice, an environmental voice. There's such an eclectic nature to the books we worked on together, but they all have as your central theme and the backdrop that we're looking at is your journey to the north of our country. And you've really made this your life's work in understanding and reaching across differences. And so even though each book is quite different from the previous one, they all have this theme of respect for our land, respect for others. I find there is a commonality to what you say, but you've very cleverly used many different forms in which to say it. And so People now see you. I think we've been working together for over 30 years now, and all they expect from you is excellence.
Flash forward from the the lunchroom in this school in Papineauville to this fledgling Canadian publisher of the venerable Simon and Schuster line, Kevin Hansen, starting up that. You've become part of the Canadian, well, you are the Canadian arm, or were then, of the publishing that was getting started. And I remember sitting down with you and Kevin talking about what might come next. And can you take us to that moment? Because this book, Ice Walker, is, I think people find it is pretty different from other books I've done. I'm glad you sort of said, well, there is a theme that draws through it, but take us to that sort of thinking that you and Kevin and we're kind of ruminating about. This is now back in, I guess, in 2016 or so.
Well, I knew, of course, that the North is your home in many ways, and as such, you serve to introduce your readers to that. Most of us never go north, but the idea of north, as Glenn Gould once reminded us, is embedded in Canadians. And so Kevin and I share an interest in, Kevin would want me to say that he's a Westerner from Alberta, but he and I share a deep interest in Northern and Indigenous matters, and have for years. And we felt that the conventional stories about the polar bears had been told. They'd been told well by scientists and by environmentalists. They'd been told well by Inuit writing of their own experience, memoirs, and so on. And I, in the back of my mind, was the idea that we wanted to create a book about the polar bear that would symbolize something much larger. And the idea was to try and balance between the inner experience of the animal and the outward experience of people surrounding the animal. And in other words, to take some of the elements of fiction. I mean, after all, there are many children's books that have animals speaking and running around and so on. But we felt that it might be possible to break down some of the boundaries between sort of fictional writing and non-fictional writing. And so I think it wasn't just our interest in doing this, but it was also your enthusiasm for it, because I could see that you became very excited about the challenge of this book. And a book which seemed a challenge now, of course, has been realized, but I'd be the first to admit that along the way, I think both of us had some reservations about being respectful of the work, and yet at the same time reaching out in ways to readers that they hadn't been reached before. So our idea was to challenge your imagination to come up with something. And I remember your leaving our meeting, and I could see that you were excited and that you felt that there might be something in this very, very broad and rather incoherent idea we'd presented you with, because we didn't really know what this book could be. It was up to you to let us know what it could be in your imagination. And you went away, and you were quiet for quite a while, away on many of your trips. And when you came back, you said that you thought you were onto something, you thought you had something. And then you came in and unfolded this map. It was a kind of imaginative map, a construct of this world that you felt you could create. And I remember we then were very excited when you spread this map out on the boardroom table, and it was almost like a star map, as it were. It was like a map of the heavens, a map of the journey. And then when we saw that this was wonderful. I'd never seen a book presented in this way before, and everyone was so excited about it. And that's how it started. It started by our stimulating you to take the challenge, and then you're accepting this challenge and coming back with something that was far more interesting than anything we'd been able to think of. And ever since then, it's been wonderful to work on this book, because even though it was challenging, I learned so much as an editor from this book. I felt that I had it wasn't just an editing experience. For me, it was a learning experience.
To wind up, as a publisher, who do you see picking up this book, and how is it going to relate to the marketplace out there?
Well, I hate to point out the obvious, but we are in a crisis in the entire world at this moment, and you and I can't even sit together in the same room and have a conversation. And if that doesn't awake your environmental concerns, I don't know what will. So I think that even though it will be strange to promote a book by perhaps over the internet for a number of reasons, and we don't know how long that will last, but I think that the timing and people's awareness of things not being quite right with our world couldn't be higher at the moment. So that of course nobody could have planned for that, and nobody wanted that to be the background into which the book was published. But I feel that the book presents a very thoughtful and inspiring and idea of how we can live together on this planet, and nobody has attempted this kind of book before, and I do think the originality of the book will draw people to it. And so we see quite a broad readership for the book. So there's a publisher's hope for a book. I start with these big ideas about where books will sell and who will read them and so on. But at the end of the day, it comes down to my reaction to, the writing. And so I think that this is a book I'm very proud of. It certainly stretched both our brains, and which was good, because I think we come up with something that's different. And so I must say I'm very proud of it. And I just should mention to you, because you and I have known one another for a long time, that the commendations you've received in the last few years for your work make me very proud, because I could say I knew him when he was just starting on this big adventure. And I noticed that Canadian Geographic is listing you as among the most important explorers when it comes to our Canadian history and culture and environment. And I'm really pleased to see that the work that you've been doing for years, and many other good people around you, you're good at acknowledging their help, is finally being recognized. So I'm just certainly proud to be your publisher.
Oh, Phyllis, thank you for that. It's been a privilege to work with you and learn from you and make things together over all these years. Phyllis mentioned the map that I trotted down to Simon & Schuster boardroom, and you won't see it super well here, but I did want to put it up there. It's 4 sheets of normal printer paper taped together, and this sort of shows the evolution of Ice Walker and how it came to be, and as a circular story about the yearly round of a polar bear that became Ice Walker. But when Phyllis and I worked together to create Circling the Midnight Sun, that afforded me an incredible opportunity to travel. It took 3 years to go around the world at the Arctic Circle, and to meet and experience the generosity and the teachings of hundreds of people of many different nationalities around the pole many of whom talked about the good intentions of gone wrong of conquering peoples from the south, who took great ideas into the north, whether it had to do with settlement or housing or healthcare or education or government or whatever it might have been, assuming that the people who lived there had nothing of that kind that was of sufficient quality to merit that. But the image that kept coming back to me as I traveled and again was this image. It's an image from the Apollo days, the late 60s, and I don't know if it's a composite image or whether it's actually one shot taken by one of the anyway, people then talked about the blue marble. They talked about the second Copernican revolution of us seeing our Earth for the first time. But this picture at night, which shows the conurbations of the planet all lit up with our zeal, but it also shows the north as dark and the equatorial rainforest and sort of unpopulated parts of the, or less populated parts of the Earth darker. And I've really been struck, and I was struck, still am struck, about the idea of us thinking we're so wise and we're so brilliant. We take the light of our enlightenment into the darkness of the north or of the rainforest or wherever it might be. And if there's one teaching that has come out of my travels, it is that it's high time we turned that idea totally upside down of taking light into the wilderness, as it were, and instead started thinking about ways to bask in the light of the people who live there. And in a lot of ways, Ice Walker is about doing that. It's my attempt to do that. And I've thought a lot about the light, our light. And more often than not, I think about Western learning. And, I have a lot of letters after my name as a result of a lot of Western learning, a lot of book learning, a lot of very fine education. Not the greatest student. But I've come to the conclusion, if you think that those letters give you some kind of corner on the truth, think again, because our light, all of those things, our policies, we live in a cone. So it's as if we're driving down the highway of life, and there we are, in our little cone of light. And inside that cone of light, even on a beautiful night when the Nurjuk is there just ahead of Orion in the night sky, mixing cosmologies, but we don't even notice that sort of thing because we're so busy focusing on the light of our own making. And what's in that light? Well, us. Everything we know, consumption, straight lines, progress, motions. And then when you put a screen around, and yeah, I just saw The Social Dilemma. Maybe you did too. It's worse, way worse than we thought. And I haven't just been thinking about this since last Tuesday Monday when we watched The Social Dilemma. But the idea that we live in this kind of echo chamber of our own provocity is just alive and well. And going to the north, I really think that there are things outside our cone of light. This is the light of the people who live there and their beliefs and their knowledge and the kinds of things that informs family and community and what it means to be wise and all of those things. Outside our cone of light are all sorts of things that we don't pay very much attention to. Curved lines, meta patterns, experience, stillness, harmony, indigenous communities, natural world, certain types of wisdom. And if this book, Ice Walker, is anything, it's a foray into the darkness outside our cone of light. And I want to just smash together a little story in 3 acts about Ice Walker and where it came from. So bears in the light. I've met bears all over the place, in Oslo and Chicago, in Yakutsk and Siberia. There's a beauty in the airport in Resolute Bay, where my friend Devin Manick lives. It smells a bit bad. Well, it's a beautiful bear. I've met bears in Reykjavik, Iceland. These particular bears were doing a sunrise salutation at the first meeting of the Arctic Circle. They weren't allowed in. It turns out, they gloriously disrupted. Not so the organizer, Olafur Ragnar Grimson, would acknowledge. A great guy, but anyway, these were largely Finnish. I eventually met them, but met bears. And there's a bear at the Arctic Circle in Norway. Smelled a bit like lavender, and I think the sister of that bear is in the Explorers Club headquarters in New York City. And yeah, there are bears all over the place. North American Fur Auction. I ran into these three. That's Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear, I think. I don't know, but you too could have one of those for about 50K Canadian. I think that's $6 US for those of you who are south of the border. But they have been used to sell everything under the sun, from shoes to yogurt, beer, cough drops, cars, consulting, conservation, food, doomed. It really doesn't matter. Bears are very much a part of who we are. So not only have they come into our consciousness as a symbol of climate change, they're a symbol of all sorts of other stuff: industry, cleanliness, exotic. Bears seem to turn our heads. Bears in the light are so much out there. Yeah, and in fact, in 40 plus years of venturing in this country of which I'm an accidental citizen, I've actually met some real bears, and lots of them, sometimes a little bit too closely. From, headed to the North Pole, there's one in Franz Josef Land. There's one in Peel Sound, off the top of Southampton Island, eating a ringed seal. I think that one's in Monument Island, in just off Frobisher Bay, and there's one at Wager Bay. For those of you who follow my column in Paddler magazine, I wrote a story about a close call with a kayak and a bear in the last issue. But yeah, so, and if you want to see bear, I mean, I'm not a big fan of zoos, but the Assiniboine Park in Winnipeg, which has a relationship with the bear conservationists in Churchill, Manitoba, where there are a lot of bears and a lot of really effective tourism going on. A lot of the orphan bears are taken down to Winnipeg, and I have to say that if you want to see bears in the wild, or not in the wild, but if you want to see live bears, go to the Assiniboine Park Zoo in Winnipeg. It is absolutely a truly remarkable place, and the work they're doing is very interesting. But my connection to bears goes way back to a newly minted BSc in biology, and getting the incredible opportunity. I worked as a lab technician in a seal lab at the University of Guelph, and I was thinking of, I really wanted to be a marine biologist as a kid, and so I ended up, through a whole series of kind of happy accidents, in a cage with a great big male polar bear called Huxley. He had a Canadian Wildlife Service number of 007, and learning to find the femoral triangle in the thigh of a bear to take blood. And this was a bear that had been used in an energetic study in Churchill, and he'd gone to the Toronto Zoo after that because he wasn't afraid of people, and he wasn't a very good zoo bear. And Huxley eventually came to Guelph, and I ended up starting a process wherein we wanted to establish the spectral sensitivity of a bear. We wanted to see what the bear could see. And with colleagues like John Lee, who's here, who's been a bear biologist his whole life, unlike me, the experiment was simple enough. I actually got the experimental setup from Jack Terhune, who'd been doing an analysis of the spectral sensitivity of harp seals. But you essentially operantly condition the animal to come to a middle paddle where you press a paddle. That's not the real light we used, it's just a test light. But we had a light source, a xenon light source, that we could alter the color and the intensity of the light. And the idea was that if the bear came and pressed the middle paddle, the light would come on or not. And if he saw the light, he would go to the left and say yes, by press the paddle and say, yes, I saw it, or the other way, and no, I didn't. And the result of that study was a curve that showed it's an elegant piece of work. It shows that bears have a particular acuity in the blue-green region. There's more to say about that, but the consequences of that study, well, I want to tell you that I haven't told this story before Ice Walker came along to very many people, because I'm not super proud of it, because having desired to be a marine biologist for my whole life and getting to actually do some marine biology firsthand, I couldn't hack it. It's sitting in the dark, a few centimeters away from a great big, beautiful, majestic creature that was slowly going berserk in captivity. I couldn't do it. But in order to give you a sense of what that involved, I got an invitation from the Principal Vaccarino of the University of Guelph to come and speak to the graduating class in biology or in biological sciences a couple of years ago. And they very kindly honored me with an honorary degree, but I finally had to fess up. This is in Memorial Hall in Guelph, Ontario, my hometown. And well, I'll let the JR on the stage that day tell you a little bit of that story.
Truth be told, although I live away from Guelph, my hometown, I can't be in this place without fondly thinking and remembering a big male polar bear called Huxley and a series of formative experiences here at the College of Biological Sciences. In spite of doing my undergrad at an unnamed university with red gowns down 401, I began here as the SEAL handler in training, which I gather was an apt acronym for a man such as myself. By degrees, though, I graduated from feeding and bleeding seals to a vision research project involving Huxley. And there were two significant outcomes of that study. One was a paper in the Journal of Comparative Biology, Biochemistry and Physiology, called The Spectral Sensitivity of a Polar Bear. And the second, possibly equally seismic consequence of that study for science was my exit from the discipline. Huxley helped me see that my gifts, such as they were far less suited to lab-based investigations of the North than they were to more field-based research, writing, and teaching in the North that curved away from the bedrock of science to the landscape of cultural anthropology and geography.
Yeah, well, scientists are human, and I have to say that the principal secretary in setting up this incredible visit, where I felt valued and honored, she said, "Is there anything you want to do at the university?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'd worked with this bear in the 70s, and I'd heard that he had become a rug, and if he had, I'd like to see it." And late on in the game, I got an itinerary, a final itinerary that said, yeah, we 3:30 this day. I was there for a couple of days. We would go to the vertebrate anatomy lab, and sure enough, there was a study skin that I recognized. Huxley had a cage routine where he put his face on the bars and he would bang the bars hour after hour, and he had no fur on the back of his right paw. Anyway, that was Huxley. So in a lot of ways, I've carried a debt to Huxley, who taught me a lot. But it was at that point in my career I kind of curved away from the bedrock of science, as I told the graduates, into the world of cultural anthropology and geography, where I was learning about bears sort of from the people who took me there in the first place. And Huxley, in a lot of ways, has that. And I have to say that my original inclinations and interests as a scientist in some ways remain. And although I've been working my entire life to take the vice grips of the sort of positivism and the scientific method off my head, to try to understand other ways of knowing, bears are an amazing organism. The vision alone. I mean, here you have an animal that can function and hunt and live in 24-hour darkness in its world, or in blinding 24-hour light. It can hunt underwater. It can hunt in the air. So it's got amazing eyes. It's got amazing eyesight, but all of its senses. But it just, I've learned a lot about, and I just want to take you a little bit. I mean, just to give you a quick sketch, there are about 20 to 30,000. Scientists really don't know how many, but that's roughly how many they are. They descended from brown bears. They may have left the coast of Siberia maybe 200,000 years ago. About the same time Homo sapiens were stepping up on their own 2 feet and becoming that part of that evolutionary ladder. 19 subpopulations have been identified in the world. Most of those bears are in Canada, if you like. And there are organizations like Polar Bears International and the World Wildlife Fund. There's a lot of elegant and important science and conservation work being done. Just spoke with Bob McDonald at Quirks and Quarks a little bit about that, and I hope some of you get a chance to catch that part of this book promotion tour that I'm on. But I want to take you to probably one of the most fascinating parts of my bear learning, if you like, and because that the Ice Walker is meant to take you into the world of the bear. And so, yeah, you have a campfire, you light wood on fire, you add a spark to wood, which is carbon, and it draws oxygen for that combustion equation and produces CO2 and water, carbon dioxide and water, and of course a bunch of energy to cook your s'mores in light and heat. Well, a polar bear, Ursus maritimus, lives in a marine environment, salt water, under ice. And yes, the ice is largely fresh water that freezes and floats to the top but they can't eat the ice. It's not a very efficient way to get your water. But what polar bears do instead, which I think is absolutely fascinating, is they employ or they are beneficiaries of a similar combustion equation that you have when you're making s'mores. They take fat, which is their main food source, from seals, largely, but other marine mammals as well, when they can get it. But seals, ringed seals and bearded seals, bigger bearded seals. But fat from seals, you add oxygen from the air they breathe, and that produces carbon dioxide and water, and of course energy that heats and powers the bear. But all of the bear's needs for water, and they're a mammal like we are, they're made of water largely. All of that water comes from what's called metabolic water, and I think that's fat. They don't drink. They can eat fat and get enough. And anyway, this is not a book about polar bear natural history. There are some amazing books. Ian Sterling's rework of his book. I mean, he's the preeminent polar bear scientist in the country and has done just staggeringly fine work and has had many graduate students and is continuing. Andrew Roche, and I mean, there are a lot of people doing a lot of important scientific work. But the bear for me was an opportunity, if you put it at the core, as Fred Bodsworth did, to say, I mean, this is an iconic image that I first saw on a t-shirt that was given to me by a woman from the Russian Geographical Society, and that says in Russian underneath, think about it. So bears are already imprinted in our consciousness. And I thought, well, why not put a bear in the middle of a story and to create a space to help readers appreciate that the bears have to live through all of the crazy stuff that we've done for the world. And coming back to the idea of our cone of light, one of the things that I have learned, of the many things I've learned from Northerners, is that the categories that we carry, bears and people, for example, are different when you are in different places in the world. And in fact, Northern people I have run into along the way have a different way of thinking about the relationship between environment, animal, and people. And they're much more fluid kinds of ideas, to the point that, so if you look at the bears in the darkness, as it were, many people I ran into in the circumpolar world on my journeys for the last book, when I would explain to them, how everybody's looking north and images of bears are coming back, they would say, well, and they'd leave the people out, and people inside, these two ladies laughed at me and said, we were bears once and we'll probably be bears again. And there were other people like Zora and Nikolai Laptender and his wife, who are reindeer herders in the Kola Peninsula. I mean, they're the idea that we could have a discussion about reindeer or bears or people as separate entities just doesn't compute in their language, in their ways, in their habits. And here's a whole festival that I stumbled into in a place called Seliadovo, and these are dancers who are dancing at the bear festival, and they've covered their heads because the tradition there, traditionally when a bear is harvested, because of the relationship, between people and bears, they didn't want to identify themselves to the bears for fear there might be some sort of retribution. But the bear is totally integrated into many cultures along the way, so much so that here's Nanurjuk and Kimmit. This is the constellation where you find the bear-spirited one in Inuit cosmology, and that sort of thing. So here's a beautiful print from Cape Dorset of a bear and some dogs and a hunter, and we look at that as a nifty piece of work, when in fact it's as much as anything a star map. And I'm not sure whether we realize that up to and including this very day. Like, here's Jonathan Pitsiolak, a friend of mine from Students on Ice, who lives in Mitamatsalek up in Pond Inlet in the north end of Baffin Island, and he's in his mid-20s. He's an incredible young man. He largely raised his two sisters when his mom died very young, on his own, and he got his first polar bear this past winter. I raft jammed my alter ego on Instagram, did a big story about Jonathan, because I was so impressed how he told the world about it. But he got his bear, he took it home, and there was a great bee inside the house he shares with some of his other family members, where the skin was prepared and they had a feast. And also Jonathan, who is learning his own culture, his Inuitness. He can actually sing his Aya songs with a drum in a different way, because he's caught a bear as part of his round. And those kind of stories I wanted to bring forward, but I wanted to find a way to do it where I wouldn't steal Jonathan's story so much as point you to it. But we get these little windows on Inuit culture along the way, and of different cultures around the world. And so here's a beautiful piece of art that is in the Horwood collection at the Canadian Canoe Museum, a dancing polar bear. Who knew polar bears dance? But that's a window into a world. But stuff that you see, so this is a carving, and here it is, that I was able to buy I bought from a kid on the beach at Repulse Bay, but probably in, I don't know, late 70s. And I don't even know who carved it, but I thought it was a bear in the first instance. But when you actually look at this carving, and here's a view from underneath, it's a person. And so the idea that bears and people that we carry that are totally separate is in some ways not accurate at all when it comes to how Northerners perceive bears. And I think we need a new way to look at our world. And so what I have done in my own travels is I've spent a lot of time talking to and learning from people of different ethnicities. In our own country, it's the people in the Inuvialuit, the Gwich'in, people across Inuit Nunangat, like right across from Nunatsiavut in Labrador, up through Nunavut and across to the Mackenzie Delta. There's a lot to be said and a lot to be learned about language and all of that in its own way has found its way into my own learning and into the book Ice Walker. In ways that took a long time to kind of sift and sort to put together, but as a way of honoring some of the many people who contributed in many ways to this book, Indigenous people. I want to just take you.
It's 2 o'clock.
Take you. If you heard that, that's creepy guy in my computer who tells me what time it is. It actually gets a laugh on a Zoom call, but I don't know how to turn him off anymore. But Arverluk Kusagak is a true Northern Canadian literary hero of mine, an incredible story. I don't know if you remember his book. You probably do. A Promise is a Promise. But he has joined us on Students on Ice on a number of occasions, and I just love him. And I sent him the manuscript of this, and he gave me some really, really important feedback with respect to Inuktitut, the language and the terminology in it. And so I called him up, and we had a bit of a chat, and I want to bring Arverluk's voice into this. And this, again, because of the streaming that was so badly handled by me on Tuesday, I want to just let this run. It's about a 10-minute conversation like with Phyllis, but only with Canada's premier Northern storyteller, Arverluk Kusagak. And I will make a little caveat here. the day before we spoke, he was going out to do something with his boat, and there was a piece of roofing that was floating around in the wind, and it must have been floating pretty hard because he went and he grabbed it and managed to shred parts of his fingers to the tune of a few stitches and so on. So, I mean, he looks a bit like he's been in a car crash, but the spirit of a great storyteller is here. Here's Arverluck.
Hi, JR. Yeah, I remember first time I met you, it was in 2017. I just landed at the airport in Resolute Bay, and you took me on one of those Zodiacs down to the ship, and that was exciting, finding somebody that knew me. You know. How are you?
You, my friend, are a legend in our house. And when I started mentioning to my wife Gail that you had a new book coming out and that it might have a raven in it, she just got all excited. Tell me about the new book and how long it's been cooking, and maybe a little bit about what it's about.
Well, actually, here's the book. I wrote a book a long time ago. There was a huge airship that flew over Repulse Bay when I was a kid, and we didn't know what it was, of course, but old people had heard that there was a huge war from across the ocean somewhere, and they had these big black things that fell down and exploded, and one old guy said, maybe it's coming to get us, like this big black thing. It was a giant airship, and so we all ran away from the path of this thing. And it was years later I discovered it was an airship. So I wrote a little story about us all running away, and Agatha, who is a friend of mine, was the main character in my story. And when I got back to Rankin Inlet, I submitted the story to my publisher. And then I was thinking about this old lady that, was who lived in Rankin Inlet or in Repulse Bay. And one of the things we always visit old people when we arrive for the first time, or when we arrive, just before we go visiting everybody else, we visit old people. That's the tradition. So I went to visit this old woman, and she wasn't home. There was nobody in the house, and I walked in and I thought, she won't be long. I'll just sit here and wait. And I was standing up the window looking out when I saw her coming, and she was carrying 2 grocery bags, and behind her there was this raven, and the old raven was just hopping, and hopping along behind her, and she came in, and I said, there was a raven following you, side, and she said, that raven, was sick last year when I found it for the first time, and I fed it, and it's been following me around ever since. So I thought, I can write a story about that, and I wrote that little story, and I called it Agatha and the Most Amazing Thing, and it was part of a book of 3 stories called Arctic Stories. And my publisher decided to take that story out and re-edit the whole thing and release it. And here it is. It's illustrated by an Inuk illustrator from Bangladesh. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful.
Arverluck, in this crazy COVID world, I've been waiting and waiting and waiting to see a finished copy of Ice Walker. And because I've worked on it for 4 years, I haven't seen it. I've seen scruffy manuscripts and then that advanced rework thing that I sent you. But the other day I was half dressed, getting ready to go on the Eden Mills Writers Festival thing online, and the doorbell rang, and there's our friend and neighbor. She has a dairy farm just down the way. She's standing at the door holding the book.
Oh,
the, the first one I have ever seen held by my neighbor who said, "Would you sign this? I know we're distant and all this stuff." So yeah, for a moment I got to hold Ice Walker, but congratulations on the publication of that. But I do want, now that we're actually connected, I want to say thank you very much for reading the advanced reader's copy of Ice Walker, and for helping me get something as fundamental as the names of the characters sorted out in that book. It was very helpful.
oh, thank you. Yeah, it was a really enjoyable read. I don't know when I've enjoyed reading a book so much, you know. And the last time I went polar bear hunting was a long time ago when my and I took them down to the Hudson Bay, you know, just out from Rankin Inlet, halfway between Rankin and Chesterfield Inlet, and we were going along the coast or along the flow edge, you know, the place where the ice ends and the ice flows all, you know, all broken up. And it was, I think, in February. And we're driving along down there, the three of us, my two boys, my two older boys, and me on the snowmobile, and they were in my sled. And then we started following polar bear tracks, and we followed them all the way almost as far as Chesterfield Inlet.
Wow.
Before the polar bear took off into this very thin ice, you know. And I always think that seawater ice is a lot more plastic than freshwater ice. Like freshwater ice always seems to be more brittle. And because when you walk on saltwater ice, it just seems to like being on a, you know, on a clean waterbed, you know. And so it, you know, it took off onto this very, you know, very thin ice, and I could just imagine it. And I decided, you know, we're not going to go there. But it was really, really interesting. And I was thinking about this song that my uncle wrote. Well, he made up, you know, one of those, you know, those kinds of songs. And they're really wonderful poetry set to music. There was a line in it that said something like, driving along with a dog team and seeing a white polar bear. I knew it could see me in the corner of its eye, but it refused to look at me, like just going along. So I always think of that line that my uncle wrote. Anyway, thank you very much for sending me a copy of the book. It was just a most enjoyable read.
Do you know a polar or story with a polar bear in it we could finish with that you might tell kids in school, or that might somehow have some of the lessons about keeping your distance or whatever?
When I was a little kid, you know, my mother was away for some reason or other, and we were staying with another uncle of mine, and it was before we had radios and before we had television. So every night when we went to bed, we were told stories to put us to, you know, to settle us down and put us to sleep. And there was a story I remember that I don't quite remember the whole story, but it was one of those stories about a little kid who refused to eat anything with gristle or muscle, any meat with gristle or muscle or anything like that. You know, and those parts of the meat are things that we really enjoy eating anyway. But this little kid only wanted to eat the very choicest, you know, soft and, you know, no muscle, you know, no gristle or anything like that. And his parents told him that if you don't eat, you know, this muscle and gristle and all that stuff, you will never be as strong as a polar bear. So the story goes, I think something like, he learned to eat all this stuff. He wasn't very particular about what parts of the animals that he ate after a while because, we eat absolutely every part of the animal that is edible anyway. And he got to be a really big, strong boy, and he had what he called a wrestling match with the polar bear, and he beat him. So that's one of those stories that, that sort of, teach you, if you don't want to eat all this, if you only want to eat choice meats, then you're never going to get, big and strong like, a polar bear. So that's not the only polar bear story that I remember, but, there are all kinds of anecdotes, of course, but, that's the one of the legends, that actually taught you something. Well, hope to see you on another one of those, if not before, on another one of those students on ice trips.
I do thank you for this, and be safe in this COVID time. And yeah, I look forward to the day when this too will pass, and we can have some fun on students on ice.
Yeah, and I'll love to meet your wife someday. So take care.
Well, she would love to meet you as well. She's a Caterpillar lady too.
Okay.
See you, Arverluck.
Have a nice day. Good luck.
Arverluck, thank you. So great to talk to you. Hope to see you again on the trail. I want to finish by taking you inside Ice Walker.
Hi, JR. Yeah, I remember first time I met you, it was in 2017. I just landed at the airport in Resolute Bay, and you took me on.
I want to finish by bringing you into the book and into the idea behind the book with a reading, just to wind up. And to do that, I want to take you into the den, Nanurjak's den. I didn't want these bears to talk in this book, but I did want to give them names just for you as a reader to get a handle on them. So this is one of Mike Bedell's amazing pictures of a den. But a den is a lot more than a hole in the ground. And to give you an idea, here's some work from Richard Harrington, who was doing bear work in the 70s when I was. But if you imagine, so there's the mouth of the den, and so if you were to draw a cross section going inside the tunnel there, you'll see that it dips down and it creates a little frost trough there, so that the cold air from outside, if that's not completely closed in, and it often is, but it will sit in that trough and allow the warm air to sit on top of it. And so that's about a body length of an adult person going in there, about the size of a bear. And then if you look at the transect going the other way, you're talking about two rooms, an upper room and a lower room. And this is where absolute magic happens. And I mean, the womb of the bear in the story is at the heart of the story. The den, in a lot of ways, is an allegory, if you like, for the womb and how the story is nurtured. And in a lot of ways, the book, I want to be a closed space to think about who we are and what we're doing. But to take you into the book, I want to read a little bit that actually happens in the den. And so here we go. The den into which the cubs will be born is far more than a hole in the snow. From the early days of formation, as new snow has fallen, even more remarkable when one considers her sleepy state, Nanu keeps an exit tunnel close to the surface of the downgrade snow. Bit by bit, she's lengthened the den on a regular basis, digging it out with her claws. Much like the anatomy of her own expanding womb, there's a smaller tunnel that leads toward the outside, and up inside is a bigger space where she resides. Early on, extra snow will be pushed out the exit tunnel, but as time moves on and her radiant heat is absorbed by the internal walls, the space expands ever so slightly, and she packs out a flat platform on which she can rest without sliding down the exit tunnel. The elegance of this design lies in the creation of a space that, while close to freezing, still allows for body warmth to shape its walls. Through a little chimney she scraped above, new air enters the den. Like the exit tunnel, this hole has to be tended as well, to ensure that it lets in sufficient fresh air without causing too much heat loss. As this process of denning continues, as if by magic, one little ball of cells at a time in her uterus awakens. Fully 5 months after mating and conception, the growth of this year's brood continues. If all goes well, in only 30 more days, there will be 3 bears sharing this one sheltered place. Outside, the sun moves to its southernmost position over the earth. The lands surrounding Nanu are winter-dressed like sugared icing. Moonshine and a gentle spatter of starlight dance blue shadows from here to there and back again as the sky turns. Arches of frozen red dogwood branches and alder catkins mask pure white Arctic hares and twitchy ptarmigan nibbling away, waiting for spring. Quiet hearts beat in hidden places around the den, echoed only by the scurrying of lemmings on grass pathways below. Above, from time to time, Nanu hears the quiet footsteps of the fox on her daily prowl. Her tracks whisper to the snowy owl where a next meal might be. Even in her state of semi-suspended animation, somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, using as little energy as possible, Nanu stands. She moves. She stands. She sits. She stands again and sniffs the vent to make sure there's sufficient outside air still filtering in. Waiting. Just waiting. Oblivious to a world without that is changing at rates and in ways she and her cubs may never comprehend. Things progress until her pregnancy gets to the point where Nanu is moving more than she's resting in any one position. Her 4 nipples are starting to swell and leak. She arches over when sitting up and licks to clean herself. With the change of position, the rippling of the muscles in her abdomen gives way to disorganized pinching in her back end that gives way in turn to regular rolling contractions. Finally, on the day the northern hemisphere reaches the center of its darkest night, the winter solstice, after more than 24 hours of muscular rhythms through her abdomen, she stands to change her position yet again, and behind her, between her back legs in the darkness, silently drops a new life that takes its first breath with a nearly inaudible mew. Well, there's more where that came from along the way. And it is a story that, as I say, is a portrait of humanity in the life of this polar bear. There's another of Mike's pictures. That was actually the print that he so kindly gave us 2 copies of as prizes for this. I want to just finish by saying that this is a project that has been a long time in the making. I don't think I could have written this book when I was 20. I hope that I have what I need to write it now, and I guess that is yet to be determined as we put it out into the marketplace. But Ice Walker, I think I signed the contract with Phyllis in April of 2016. It takes a long time to write a short book. But I do want to say to you who have been with this launch, those of you who were there on Tuesday and those of you who are joining us now, either again or maybe for the first time, I hope you'll share this. I hope you will find the book and read it. Go to your local independent bookseller or get it wherever you can at the library. But I want to finish by toasting you, and because this is a launch, launches are festive occasions. I remembered the launching Circling the Midnight Sun. I actually got a likeness, got the cover of the book. I put some styrofoam in it that was about the same size as the book, and I put it on a bottle of well-shaken champagne, and I wanted to launch the book. That, as you might imagine, went horribly wrong, and I had a beautiful suede jacket on that's still stained from that day in front of a whole lot of people in Sealy's Bay Community Hall, but nevertheless. But I wanted to finish with a toast to you. So I happened to be in the liquor store the other day in anticipation of this, and I said, have you got anything here with polar bears on the label, knowing that toothpaste and all these other things? And the chap said, without missing a beat, he said, oh yeah, no trouble. We've got polarized vodka, and it has 2 polar bears on it. And I said, great, I've never had that, but I don't know if there's much to recommend. I mean, it's a Canadian product. It's quadruple distilled. I guess that's good. It's I see here, it's double gold SIP award of 2019. Just by the feel of the bottle, I think that might have been an award bestowed by an esteemed panel of people drinking this stuff out of paper bags in a park somewhere, but never mind. And they may in fact have gotten the SIP award because it's actually in a bottle that doesn't break. But what I want to do is I want to take those polar bears, I want them to put them in one of 2 mugs, and I want to toast you to say, I'm glad you found this story of a book coming to be. I hope you will buy the book and read it and put it into your book club, to contact me, and let's try to make this world a better place by thinking a little bit harder about our relationship with the natural world through the polar bear. To you, the readers of this book, toast to you. You can get in touch with me through Instagram, my website, through Facebook, and of course Adventure Canada, my partner. If you'd like to come and join me on Into or Out of the Northwest Passage next year, COVID willing, I would really look forward to that. But in the meantime, I do want to say to all of you, safe travels with in the COVID time. Enjoy your reading. Please buy the book and sell it to, or give it to as many people. Are you catching the theme here? Launches are about getting it out into the marketplace, and that's what I'm doing. So long for now. Again, thank you for joining us.